To introduce our panelists, here in the middle is Thomas Bruns, the Regional Senior Commercial Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Abu Dhabi. So you've come a long way. Welcome to Pittsburgh. Good to see you. Coming every bit as long a way is Mr. Muhammad Alamadi, the CEO of DuCab Metals. And Petra, you've made the shortest journey here to today's event. Petra is the president and CEO of Catalyst Connection here in our region. But I emphasize region because that's what she does. She works with smaller manufacturers, especially across all of, well, beyond southwestern Pennsylvania. So I'm going to start and let each of them tell you a little bit more about who they are and what they do and their organizations and how they fit into this space. And I'm just going to go right down this way. So Petra, tell us a little bit about Catalyst Connection. Yeah, where you fit.
Yeah, thank you, Bill, and thank you for having me this morning. I'm actually here representing Ms. Pravina Raghavan, and she's the director of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program. And what I'd really like to share with all of you is some of the details about that particular program, because it's a very important part of the U.S. industrial policy and the U.S. industrial base. So the MEP program is funded through the federal government, through the U.S. Department of Commerce. And so the Department of Commerce has been a strong supporter of our event here today. We're the only federal program that is dedicated to supporting and serving small and medium-sized manufacturers in this country. And so every small manufacturer in the United States, anywhere you go, has access to an MEP program. And every square inch of the United States is covered by an MEP center like mine, Catalyst Connection. We're the MEP of southwestern Pennsylvania, but as I mentioned, we are part of this extensive network throughout the country. And I think that's very important because as we think about collaboration, cooperation throughout our country and throughout the world, the MEP centers act as a convener of their local communities, their local ecosystems to support manufacturing and to support manufacturing supply chains. So I'll leave it at that for now, Bill, and then I'm sure we'll have more to talk about in terms of the role that we can play, again, in this sort of international collaboration and cooperation.
Excellent. Definitely want to come back and build on that. Thomas Bruns, tell us a little bit about your role and then kind of how you can help to facilitate the kinds of connections we're talking about.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bill. So I'm based in Abu Dhabi, but I cover for the Department of Commerce the Gulf region. And the commercial service that's supporting this event, we try to support exporters overseas to help them find buyers and partners. And I think in the context of our organization, I think we've realized that regionalization is key to allow exporters to have more bang for their buck. So when they are maybe interested in a great hub like the UAE, they're also, we try to get them connected with other markets that may be smaller, but through our network they're able to connect and support their businesses. I've been there in the UAE now for 4 years, and it's a great place to have a regional office because of all its connections throughout the Gulf, but not only, and also into the Middle East, Africa region. You have 1,500 companies, as was mentioned yesterday, U.S. companies that are there that cover not only the Gulf, but Africa, Turkey, Asia. And so being able to connect companies that have gone 14 hours all the way to the UAE to other markets, I think is really useful. So my role in terms of our regional framework is really to try to help companies get more out of that investment.
Excellent. Good. We'll talk a little bit more about how that works and the role you can play and how you can help to facilitate. Next up, DuCab Metals. Tell us a little bit about your company.
Yeah. DuCab Metal business is like a manufacturing-based company in UAE with around 230,000 tons of copper and aluminum. So we do around 1.5 billion turnaround every year. We are an export company. I think we are a product of the services that's been offered by the office. We export around 70% of our output to more than 50 countries. So regionalization is core of what we are doing, and it is really one of the foundations that could help us to grow more of our export.
Got to ask you, because we heard so much about supply chain yesterday, how's it been for you over the past couple of years in terms of managing that kind of supply chain and participating in one?
Interesting. I mean, literally, as been mentioned yesterday, I think we are living in a very good spot globally where UAE was a role model of building that infrastructures during the COVID, where honestly, 2020 was one of the most profitable year for us from a business point of view. We developed a lot of new customers, a lot of new markets. This all happens with literally the foundation which is being built around the ecosystem that we have in UAE, from ports and legislations and rules and processes. I think these modules should be taken place and replicated.
Tom, I wondered, do you see this from your perspective, the companies you're working for, being able to do a lot of business, sourcing a lot of material,
Yes.
goods and services?
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And you know, just looking back to the supply chain question, I think what the COVID pandemic and Russia's war in Ukraine has, I think, made everyone realize is that we need more resiliency. And you know, this topic that we're raising, the regional trade agreements, I think is a part of the solution. The U.S. government understands that that's something that I think will help, because we can get government and private sector to start talking in advance of these crises to see how we can make these supply chains more resilient. One specific example I think the U.S. government is working on is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, where they have 4 pillars, and the second pillar is actually about supply chain. And there are 14 countries that are involved in that. And that sort of discussion, I think, will help us be more prepared in the future when these types of crises happen.
Yeah, Petra, I wonder, among the organizations you work with, how big a struggle has this been over the past couple of years, and how have they dealt with it?
Yeah, well, certainly the MEP program and even in our community proved itself during the COVID pandemic. We were able to, as a network, again, you know, we have this national network of service providers, professionals, as well as our manufacturers, and we were able to connect companies. So if a company needed something they weren't able to readily get through their normal channels, we were able to connect them to our colleagues, you know, in other states and so forth. We helped a lot of companies pivot during the pandemic, so to begin to produce important products that were response-oriented, whether it was medical device, healthcare-related research, and so forth. And so, yeah, there are, you know, still challenges, but again, I think when you have this kind of strong ecosystem, and I think that's what's important about regionalism, is building up that local ecosystem, that local community that can support the businesses and ultimately support the workers. Obviously, it's about, you know, job growth, job creation. But again, that ecosystem, I think, is so critical to that fabric.
Yeah, I see you nodding from your perspective about the importance of ecosystem. It seems you feel you really got one where you do business.
I think all the ecosystems in the regionalizations need to be revisited all over the places. I think most of the RTAs is being signed long time ago, and it's been taken for granted. I think the pandemic and then Russia-Ukraine issues created a lot of needs and essential needs to review all of these ecosystems which is available and injected with and reinvest in it in a way that could help both parties and help the flow of services, goods to be going smoothly between countries. I think it is the time that we revisit all of these ecosystems.
Yeah, Tom?
Yeah, just to add on that, I mean, I think that you know, specific to the UAE, which has always been you know, the focus of being the energy sector, but with a vision to diversify the economy, I think these crises have definitely put an emphasis on food security, on healthcare. And for U.S. companies, that's great too, because it opens up opportunities in areas that weren't necessarily there in the past. So I think there's a positive also to these crises, is that it opens up opportunities to companies, in particular SMEs, that didn't necessarily have opportunities there in the past.
Well, and I wondered about that because a lot of the topics we were talking about yesterday, when we had some big companies here talking about, how do you do this kind of trade? How do you do business globally? And people like that, they've got people to do those sorts of things, right? And to help navigate. It's very different when you're talking about SMEs, small, mid-sized businesses, manufacturers, to play in this space. Is that an area where organizations like yours can help?
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. As you know, the workforce challenges, it's hard to have a discussion like this without touching on the workforce challenges that we experience. And it's particularly can be acute for a small company when, they just can't compete at that level for workers. And so, we've been able to, as a network, support the U.S. Department of Commerce in issuing a jobs quality toolkit. This is an in-depth guide for employers to follow, similar to the Baldrige process. So you're familiar with the Baldrige process. There's 10 major categories, sub-elements in each category that really establish the best practices for a company, not just manufacturers, any company, in terms of how they operate their business, how they treat their workers, and so forth. The Jobs Quality Toolkit follows that model, but is specifically focused on employer-employee relationships. And so we're very, very pleased to be supporting the launch of that. It was just recently launched by Secretary Gina Raimondo, so your boss probably.
Yes.
So just launched recently. And we hope to really translate that and transition that to serve and support small manufacturers. Think about what can they implement as a best practice so that they can compete with large multinationals for the workers that they need. And in many cases, sometimes they can offer a even higher job quality than some larger companies. So you never know.
Part of the value proposition there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Mr. Alameda, you mentioned taking another look at a lot of these regional trade agreements, maybe dusting them off and making sure they're still effective in this new environment we're working. Can you give us any specific examples where you think, well, this one is working really well, it's been really valuable to me and my company. Here's one that could maybe use a little revision, a little more modernization.
Yeah, I mean, with exporting to more than 50 countries, we faced a lot of challenges, especially during pandemics and let us say disruptions of availability of containers, availability of freights, and availability of that. I would say the GCC countries had built a very nice system, and it's been there for a while, and I think it's the time that we can take it and utilize the advanced solutions like blockchains and all of these nice available AI solutions to help and boost these collaborations, having a unified systems between parties. Honestly, till date, we didn't face that literally between any RTAs, like a unified systems and full integrated ecosystems talk to each other, and the flow of products follow that. I think globally we are waiting for this role model of the RTAs, which could, I think, be replicated. Honestly, our governments are working, in UAE, are working at a very, let us say, stable pace on that. I think, as been mentioned yesterday, that UAE and India signed a very thorough and long agreement, CEPA agreement, which is going through delivering all of these ideas, trying to integrate systems, trying to integrate some of the laws, some of the regulations in order to help the flow of products. But answering questions, the full system which can be replicated did not yet exist, honestly. I think it's always a room for developments of these systems.
Tom, I see you nodding your head to this idea that there's work to be done in this space.
Sure, but I think there are examples that we can build on. I mean, the USMCA, for example, that now includes a digital chapter. And I think this general trend, right, towards agreements that are more than just tariff agreements, that are dealing with non-tariff barriers. So things like good regulatory practices are now, looking at that when we're looking at trade agreements, IP, intellectual property, environmental provisions, labor rights, services. This whole idea that, and we see this in the Gulf, for example, this move from fossil fuel economies to knowledge economies. There's an interest in how do we take into account cross-border data flows in trade agreements so that businesses can develop innovation in those markets, so that those markets can attract talent and capital. There's access and accessibility to the latest technologies and services in those markets, not just in the United States. You need to establish a regulatory system that allows that. And maybe regional trade agreements can be part of that. It's definitely strengthened by the USMCA here, and I think that could be something that could happen in other trade agreements as well.
Yeah. I wonder, Petra, do you see an openness to this more regional approach to these kinds of global connections, or is there sometimes fear or concern among companies that are thinking about engaging in this way?
No, I think manufacturers definitely want to participate in these large multinational supply chains. Absolutely. I think the challenge becomes is understanding all of these requirements and then how to translate those requirements into their business. So just a simple example might be quality management system. Seems very simple. ISO requirements, they're global, lots of companies participate in those. It can be a very substantial undertaking, just that simple little requirement for a company with, let's say, 40, 50 employees. Critical member of the supply chain maybe makes a very unique product, yet can be an overwhelming requirement for them to be able to participate. And so how does a company do that? And so that's where I think the role of this kind of public-private partnership that the MEP program represents, where there is some public investment, federal, state, whatever that would be, public investment to help those companies achieve some type of a requirement that allows them to participate and benefit from these types of trade agreements, global cooperation, and so forth. So it's just all part of that puzzle, I think. I think we all have a very important role to play.
Yeah. What role, how can commerce help do that and help open those doors and make it easier to plug into the DuCab Metals networks and other?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're here to do. So we have obviously a network of U.S. export assistance centers throughout the United States that feed in, leads to our overseas network in markets. And so where I sit, we'll receive, information about a company looking to do business, in the UAE and help them find a buyer or a partner and maybe see if there is regional potential for that service or product in the region and connect them to our local teams that have the institutional memory, that are there and can connect people in different sectors of activity. And we can do that in many ways through specific customized support and matchmaking, or through a trade mission, a promotional event, or perhaps they're in contact with a potential partner, but they're not totally sure who they are. We can do a due diligence product for them. So there's a series of things we can do at the embassy level that I think are really useful, in particular for small and medium-sized companies. And I think that's something that we want to make sure we're supporting SMEs that are interested in this market. And so I encourage people to reach out to their local export assistance center.
I can vouch for it because we've referred companies to your network.
Good, and I think that the advantage is, especially in the Gulf, there are very strong government-to-government relationships. I mean, we're in touch with our counterparts on a regular basis, and there's an expectation from our partners often that we know the companies that are doing business in the market. So I think there's every interest for companies to come and reach out to us. In the United States, the private sector works very independently from government. And so there isn't necessarily immediate impulse to go and reach out to the government overseas. But on the contrary, it's to your advantage. And your competitors are doing it quite proactively, so it's in your interest to do so as well.
Fascinating. Oh, and by the way, if anybody has any questions, I'd love to weave you into the conversation here. And there are 2 microphones there in the aisles, so if anybody wants to offer a comment or a question, please just walk up to one of those mics, and I will see you there, and I will bring you into this. You know, we're talking about pretty sophisticated stuff here. You got the United States of America, you have the UAE, you kind of know the game, you know how business is done. Can developing nations play in this space, and can they get benefit from regional trade agreements and these kinds of structures, or are they kind of left out of these processes?
Sure, I think I'm a believer that RTAs and deep RTAs are solutions and strong foundations for keeping a stability and sustainability in the economies. I think new nations and developing nations can benefit a lot to set together certain long-term strategies and investments together, help each other to, let us say, achieve a shorter milestone in achieving what they want and achieving their goals. I think these collaborations will be always extracted from the RTAs and the deep RTAs. They should be always the foundations, a platform of discussions, then everything gonna follow through. I believe RTA is one of the very and most important solutions toward helping the sustainability and facing all of the disruptions in the global supply chain and global economy. I think we need to build that agile system that if I have a shortage, that you can support me and vice versa. And this is the level of collaborations we need to build to be the outcome of these RTAs.
Yeah, well, and I'm sorry.
I was just maybe to build on that, I think what really drives demand or drives business growth is demand that an RTA and similar types of global cooperation can create. And so, a small business, small, medium-sized manufacturer, that's what they're responding to. They're responding to that demand. And, ultimately, that's what creates that business opportunity, which has all those positive impacts of job growth, job creation, and regional economic prosperity, which I think is so important in developing nations. As important there as it is here in our own community. So I think that's really a good tie-in.
I think about the complexities of all of this, though, and the information and the data that it takes, to make it work ideally. And you mentioned things like blockchain and some of these new technologies. How important do you think they're going to be? And how far along are we in adoption of those types of technologies, and how critical are they going to be as the world moves forward with these sorts of regional structures?
Yeah, I think we are at a very good position from a point of having a data. I think the data is available today from all of the transactions, processes that we are doing are enough to build a very strong ecosystem. The available options of processes and transactions, like exchanging information and data and sometimes money like a blockchain, it is a very easy access solutions and could simplify. I think we are waiting for the role model to build that nice system and then I think replicate it. And I'm quite sure that it is being prepared at many regions that because of the necessity and need of it.
Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, no, if I could just add on that and provide an example. I mean, in the UAE recently, they just passed a data privacy law. We're still waiting for the implementing regulations and a government data law, but that process I thought was very good because it included a lot of industry engagement in the process before that law was published. Now, that type of law and regulation is going to be really important to companies that are looking to invest and do business in the UAE. A regional trade agreement that included some sort of data privacy law would allow, as you said, to expand that market even further. So, but in this case, companies are going to now have to engage with each of the governments about that particular data privacy law. So issues like that can be expanded across the region, I think, open up a market and make it easier for investment. And that's good for the companies and it's good for the countries involved.
Yeah, Absolutely. I would just comment that, certainly the adoption of advanced technology is critical, going to continue to be critical to the success of a small manufacturing company. I think the challenge that we have is making sure no one's left behind, because it's going to be those companies that can really accelerate that pace of technology adoption that are going to be successful. And so again, the role of our program is to make sure that doesn't happen, that we don't leave companies behind. And I would say even more importantly, we don't leave people behind. Again, that's something we're definitely keeping our eye on.
Petra, you were deeply involved, and it was referenced in passing yesterday, this Build Back Better grant that our region was able to secure from the Biden administration to build out our cluster of autonomous systems. I mean, Pittsburgh's been one of the world leaders in field robotics and robotics generally for 40 years, really, and recently was awarded one of the largest grants the federal government is giving any region in the United States to really take it to the next level. But a lot of the philosophy behind that is really focused on these smaller companies that are really at risk of being left behind.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, Bill, because it does speak to, again, where's our country going? Our country, our government is investing in communities. And it's the communities that can come together and bring that whole ecosystem together to support a sector like robotics and autonomous vehicles. Those are the ones that are going to continue to, secure that federal investment, that match, and grow their economies and grow their communities. So the Build Back Better is actually not the first time our government has invested in this type of community building activity. This whole effort started back in 2014, 2015 with a program called Investing in Manufacturing Communities, IMCP. It was a Department of Commerce-led initiative. And Southwestern Pennsylvania was one of the first IMCP communities in the country. So we have started to build our ecosystem over the last, almost 10 years. Recently, we were awarded a defense manufacturing community, so we're building that same ecosystem around defense suppliers. And now, as you said, we were awarded a Build Back Better. So this is kind of a trend for us to demonstrate that, we can come together as a community, as an ecosystem. We can invest in our businesses, invest in our workers, to support not only our own local economy, but then to become a critical part of the entire U.S. domestic supply chain. And I think the government is looking at this community to be the leaders in robotics and autonomous vehicles. I mean, we have the research assets, we have the startup tech-based community, we have the existing established manufacturers that can be a critical part of that supply chain, and we have the workers, to make it all happen. That's where it really, I would say the rubber hits the road, is do we have the people to make it all happen? And great community partners like a lot of the people in this room.
Yeah,
very exciting.
Years ago when I was talking to the folks at Carnegie Mellon about the potential for robotics, he said, yeah, but Pittsburgh has it all, because we can write the code, but we can also build the machine, and we've got all those skills here, and it's a real edge. Do I actually have a question out here? I see somebody standing by a microphone. Yeah, please, go ahead.
So something Mohammed brought up, which was the standardization and where do you have backups in supply chains so that you can collaborate. We've seen the movement away from SIC codes to NAICS codes to now UNSPSC classification systems. Is that something that becomes critical to the data exchange so that you can find those suppliers both regionally, Petra, so within our region, but then globally and between countries? Is there an adoption towards that? Is there a standard data set that you can exchange information to know where to source things? Is really the bottom line. Is UNSPSC adopted?
Is there such a thing? Yeah. Is this one of the things that has to be solved, right?
Yeah, we're still using NAICS codes, North American Industrial Classification System, as the #1 tool, but then, really we rely on our personal knowledge, outreach, to really know who those manufacturers are in our respective communities and share that throughout our network. So it's really an organic, from my perspective, from the MEP program nationally, our knowledge of small and medium-sized manufacturers is organic. It's something we've built up over the last 30 years, and it's based on our personal outreach, engagement, and relationships with the companies in our community.
little bit of a separate subject, was talking about standards because I think it's super important. Actually, the Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technologies is supporting this event, actually has standards in the UAE under their mandate. And they've been working very closely with standards organizations in the United States to ensure that the proper standards are in place so companies can do business in the UAE. And in fact, recently, you were talking about electrical vehicles and autonomous vehicles. Obviously, the UAE wants to be a leader in that field as well. And with Department of Commerce money, we organized workshops in both Saudi Arabia and the UAE on standards in EVs and AVs. And we had the Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, and standards organizations do presentations with the UAE government, the Qatari government, and the Omani government in Dubai on this subject, so that as U.S. industry and others ramp up, we can provide the services and products in the UAE. So I think there is a concerted effort internationally to ensure that as our economies change and develop, that we have those standards. Perhaps, and this is something, and when we talk about what the World Bank talks about as a deep regional trade agreement, can we include standards in those regional trade agreements to take it back to our subject so that we can enable trade in that way? I think that's an opportunity for sure.
Fascinating, Mr. Al-Ahmadi. I'm going to give you the last word. Any final thought or observation you have about our discussion that you hope the audience would take away as we think about supply chains, regional trade agreements, and some of these unanswered questions?
Yeah, I think we have a very, let us say, a natural accelerator to go through these ideas and try to explore them. I think the level of disruptions in the global supply chain and all of the noises happen in many industries push us all to think about solutions. And from my point of view, one of the foundations for any solution is going to be signing RTAs. I think this is the starting discussions. This is the start of building these collaborations, exchange know-how, exchange ideas, and try to build that ecosystem between countries. I think, again, we are looking for the role model that can be replicated, and I think everybody is desired to do that from my point of view.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. Really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.
A round of applause for our panel. Good, you all can.